The next 10 graphs should answer the big question that is at the bottom of your screen. Why does workforce housing rent growth continue to be far above both the 10-year and the 30-year trend lines this late in the cycle? It shouldn't be happening, but it is happening, and let's talk about why it is. And this first graph here really frames our quandary. I want you to look at the bars from 2011 onwards, right? So bars from 2011 to 2019. These are showing how many apartment units were delivered after the recession. As you can see, we delivered a lot of new units, a heck of a lot, especially if you compare it to the 15 years before that. The puzzling thing is that the vacancy rate, which should have shot up as new units were delivered, that's that orange line on the screen, actually declined. So, weird. We built over 1.5 million new units, but somehow magically ended up with higher occupancy rates nationwide, not lower? How did that happen? Maybe this next graph explains it. This time we're looking at combined single-family and multifamily new construction. The blue bars are single-family. The orange bars are multifamily. So now you realize that multifamily supply is pretty tiny compared to the single-family construction market. So here's what really happened. In 2003, 2004, 2005, 6, and 7, these years, what actually happened was supply was a lot higher than demand. Demand is this wavy gray line. So you notice that supply in each of these years is actually higher than demand, something that contributed to the crash, though it wasn't the big reason. And then in 2008 and 2009, supply and demand were in balance, right? So supply was dropping, demand was dropping at the same time. Well, 2010, again, supply was higher than demand. But by 2011, no one was doing much construction, single family or multifamily. So the first time supply, since the recession started, now you had a situation where demand was much higher than supply, right? And in 2011, we built almost nothing. This is only about 600,000 units compared to almost 1.8 million 5 years before that here in 2006. So we were building nothing in 2011, but the demand was going up. Now, as that demand went up, a big gap, a huge big gap started appearing in the marketplace. And that gap didn't close for 6 years. Not until 2017 did the gap close. But because single family found households and renter household formation was very strong in 2018, probably because the millennials are finally getting jobs, now we have a newer gap developing, and that's right here. And that's keeping rental prices going even though they've gone up so much. Another big factor is the monthly payment. As you can see, except for right here in 2011 and 2012, home payments are consistently higher than rent payments. And that gap has now widened in the last 2 years. So you see it right here. Well, that's sustaining apartment demand. But that demand is not across the board. The 3 lines on the graph show you vacancy trends by apartment class. The blue line is the vacancy levels for the Class A new construction, right? And you can see very clearly vacancy levels are moving up. We build more. Well, now we have lower vacancy levels, higher vacancy levels, lower occupancy levels. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, unlike past cycles, 93% of all this new inventory was Class A. So only 7% was Class B, which is this orange line. So the Class B, which is in orange, also started to decline and continued to decline throughout this, this last 8-year cycle. Since President Clinton ended the HUD development program in 1989, we've built almost 0 Class C. And given that the Bs are also in demand, very few of the older Bs were rolling over and becoming Class C, which is what usually happens. So you see that that Class C vacancy went from a very high 9% to an all-time low of 3.9% today. And since no developer is focused on Class B or C housing, it is likely that Class C will have sustained high rent growth for a while. And speaking of that rent growth, well, clearly Class C rent growth has been strong. That's the red line at the top. Now, keep in mind the historical rent growth average is around 2% over the last 30 years, around 2.5% over the last 10 years. But as you can see, it was very high, so it was above 6%, which is a crazy good number. 4% is champagne. At 6%, you just can't believe your luck. But even after the supply glut came in, and it came in right here, even after it came in, you've got nationwide trends where Class C is over 3%, right? Many strong metros are at double those average levels. Atlanta, Orlando, Phoenix, Las Vegas, all of these at double this level. So they're still around 6%, many of them higher than 6%. You're about to see a list of those. And so you see incredible, incredible growth, which leads to incredible returns. Keep in mind, 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but when we are trying to project doubling investor money in 5 years, we're looking for 2.5 to 3%. At 4 or 5%, we can make all the damn mistakes in the world and still get there. Now, syndicators like me who buy a lot of Class C apartments were worried that the incoming supply would take renters away from our properties. What we didn't understand is that only 2% of the median income households could afford the rents of these brand new apartments. That's right. Only 2% of tenants can afford the new apartments that are being built today, which is why the existing stock of the older apartments, the 70s and 80s apartment, has now become such a prize. And it's not that apartment developers haven't tried to adapt. They have. As you can see, in the last 10 years, as rents for the new apartments went up, that's the blue line right there. Well, we also saw new apartments get smaller by over 50 square feet in just 10 years. They were trying to shrink them to make them cheaper. Well, it wasn't just the apartment guys. Single family properties are also shrinking because the cost of construction, both labor and materials, is rising way faster than inflation. And it is this next graph that explains why it is so difficult to fix this damn problem. Look at the crazy increase in construction costs over the last 26 years. The Chinese are building a New York-sized city every few months, and so are the Indians. So steel and concrete and glass and all the other stuff is just not cheap anymore. The graph shows that a room that could be built for $43,000 in 1992 now costs $110,000 to build. We're not talking 2% inflation here, more like 4 or 5%. And that, ladies and gentlemen, makes it very difficult for both single family and multifamily developers to keep building for the common man, And so people like me who took control of those apartments for the common man put themselves in a position to raise rents. As you can see, historically, rents rise at the same level as the consumer price index, like clockwork, right? But now that connection between rents and the consumer price index is broken because of all the things we've just talked about. And that leads us to our last graph in our apartment story, which is about prices. We measure these prices in dollars per unit or per door, as the industry calls them. And if each door costs $100,000 in the year 2008, well, today it costs $160,000. That's just the average. There's lots of them that are $1 million a door. And this makes it very, very lucrative to buy older apartments for $60,000 a door, spend $10,000 a door on fixing them up, and then renting them out to that common man who is completely left out in the cold because of all of these very sad trends. And that, I believe, is the biggest, the most powerful, and the most accessible opportunity in real estate over the next 5 to 10 years. Workforce housing for the common man.